talk about either thing.
Okay, then let's not talk about that. Let's talk about Split and let's talk about Lego Batman.
All right.
Of those, I think Split has a few better things to talk about, but
we can briefly mention Lego Batman. We're not going to really talk about it. We're going to talk about Split. Mainly, we're going to talk about Split. We can also then talk about the fact that Unbreakable 3 is actually happening. Okay, yeah. That's what's going on.
Okay.
Give me a second.
Snap back to reality.
Yeah, I hate you so much.
Oh, there goes gravity.
Okay. Whoops, goes gravity. Oh dear God. All right, I'm just gonna read the entire intro.
Okay.
No, that's not true. I can just read this part. Okay. So we're going to do things a bit different, I guess, in terms of we'll make these a little more formulaic. In terms of we're going to just kind of talk about the TV and movies we haven't been able to talk about since the original edition of the podcast hasn't really been around for a while. So this is going to cover a wide gambit of things that have happened in 2017 so far. So some fairly or some stuff fairly recently, and we'll just kind of jump around and see what happens as we talk about things that Caillou mainly has been dying to yell about in almost every way, shape, or form at times since he hates everything. So
I love several things at multiple things. That's not true at all.
It's a lie. He says that to himself to pretend. And Sam literally hates everything, but that's for different reasons.
Except for the story of Grape Coon. Grape Coon makes my soul just, complete.
We're not talking about Grape Coon.
But Grape Coon.
So that I made a mistake. I gave them both too much freedom, and this is what happens.
She's not a penguin. That's the flaw in your reasoning.
Okay, so yeah, we're going to...
Lulu is completely a humbled penguin. Haven't you watched Kimono Friends?
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start with...
The penguin doesn't know she's a penguin. That's the problem.
I will literally mute both of you. I will hack into Caillou's computer. I will mute you both. Okay, so we're going to start with the television portion of this, and so I guess we'll just call this What's Happening in TV. And apparently what's happening right now for us is 13 Reasons Why. Because Netflix decided to release a show about suicide, teen angst, and audio tapes that inspired Caillou's Laserdisc thing. So, 13 Reasons What's Happened. We've all watched it. Some of us too rapidly. Actually, all of us too rapidly. But I guess we'll just go. So, Caillou, well, let's let you start first. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, look, I have a lot of complaints about the show, as I do about, many things, as David pointed out. There is stuff to like here, and I do want to get into that later on, but I think broadly, I hated the show as I was watching it, and it got better towards the end, for a number of reasons. But I still have some issues that I think Sam is going to go into with its, overall intent, and what it ends up doing in terms of being an effective show with a message for the young people who are watching it. I think broadly speaking, I do think it ends up glorifying suicide just from its basic premise. I do think it doesn't do the show is a weird balance of responsibility, because I feel like it wants to talk about it wants to talk about rape culture. It wants to talk about kind of how misogyny is built into everyday interactions, and how everyone is culpable and responsible for that, even if you're whether you're a full-on rapist or somebody making an off-color joke or whatever. We're all complicit in creating this culture. But I feel like the show does not balance those responsibilities well, because there's another sense in which the rapist is a much worse person than
to quote the
other
show.
people.
Someone has the great line, "I published a poem, he's a fucking rapist." And I agree with Caillou very much that the show does a very poor job of disproving that point, and saying that even though there are 13 reasons, really there are 4 reasons or maybe 3, and the other 10 are just this is why I didn't have any support systems, but you know, like these two people pushed me over the edge hard.
I think the basic premise of the show does a better job of expressing the cultural issues at fault here than it does dealing with like the problem of suicide and whether people do enough to help people who are thinking of committing suicide. I think the suicide angle is really like a much more problematic part of this, partly from intent and partly from execution.
Right, Sam, do you have any more general stuff you wanted to add?
I would say that, like, as I told Caillou when I was watching the first part of the show, there is a way to do this which is very interesting, and they chose not to go that path. I think that making the title the main character, Clay, accused of sexual assault by this girl, would have been a much more effective and interesting plot, because by the end of the show, every character, I understand their point of view, I understand why, except for Bryce, who is literally a cartoon villain stereotype walking around a story made of real characters. And I think that if you're talking about rape culture is not the idea that like men sexually assault. Part of that idea is also that it is dangerous to everyone when things like affirmative consent are not standard, when all sexual relationships have large amounts of alcohol, and when all these questions are so hard to answer. And so I think it would have been a much more interesting story if there was, you know, an ugly drunken hookup between Clay and this girl, and the actual, because the show does a very interesting thing of, in like 2 specific instances, claiming that she is a liar, and then in every other instance she is therefore telling the truth. And that is like that very, like, you know, the lack of multiple perspectives and everything they did with Bryce in terms of him not being a character really made like the last third of this show very difficult for me. Of there are so many interesting, clever things you could be doing and actually making everyone responsible, as opposed to, why, yes, you shouldn't stand up for or associate with the, you know, walking cartoon villains.
I think I agree with you in large part, and I think that like I had a similar thought, which is that like I think the show might be more compelling, and I don't know if this is possible, like more from the perspective of a Bryce character or someone in between, like you say, someone who had an encounter with her that was questionable, who comes to kind of confront that, because like Clay really, he is complicit in and very guilty in the way that he feels for her suicide, but he is exonerated basically, other than a few moments of the aspects of rape culture that the show is like trying to address. And I do think that's like a weakness in the show, that it doesn't present the journey of somebody who's like, oh, I was a part of this and I participated in it. It's really trying to tell this like kind of straightforward love story that ends tragically with him.
I mean, I understand why Sam comes from the perspective of wanting him to have been from that perspective and have Clay at least have a question of whether or not affirmative consent was, you know, obtained or something like that. I actually don't think it would have been a better show for most people, and mainly because I think things that appeal to Sam's ability to want the show to be interesting is a terrible idea for a suicide show.
I don't think this should have been a suicide show. I think that it should have picked one or the other, because it underserves both sides by trying to balance.
I mean, that's fair. I mean, at the same time, it's one of those ones where, I mean, this is definitely the from everything I've seen, because I haven't read the book, but from hearing the author talk about it, it does sound like they made a very distinct decision when they decided to actually have other characters exist, because the book sounds much more like it was basically one night of Clay listening to these tapes as he had a personal insight and look at like
that's
what
not
happened.
the other thing with the book. The other thing in the book is she lives, but
no, she does not, Sam. No, she does not. That is absolutely not true.
Considered that, but chose to
yeah. The interviewer said, what the interviewer said was he had considered at one point letting her live and making it more about a book about people making it be a thing about how everyone had a second chance, but he decided that didn't actually work, and it didn't fit with what he was trying to do, so he changed his mind. He did say he considered it, but that's absolutely not what happened. So no, the show itself did not decide to the show itself did not decide to like kill her off when the book did.
Okay.
The book itself was
Okay.
always about suicide. It's just the difference was
didn't lie to me. Fair enough.
the book was a much more personal thing just about Clay. And it kind of dealt with more like of his emotions of just kind of like him trying to come to terms with like reasons why this friend of his killed herself, and him not really understanding and then finding out reasons. Whereas this, because they wanted to add more characters, they expanded it. And I will agree with you right now. I like this show much more than both of you do. But even as someone who liked it, there was always the weirdness of like this being 13 episodes of basically like discussing this girl's suicide and explaining parts about it, and it's slowly going across and continuously being like exposed. Just kind of the reason why I like the fact that they're probably going to make a second season, even though it won't, more or less, I can't imagine it will involve suicide again as much.
That would be amazing if they did. Like if someone else has 13 tapes, that'd be awesome.
Well,
so
Alex,
every season, someone kills themselves.
I mean, big spoiler alert! It ends with a character attempting suicide.
But I don't think we don't know.
We don't know, but that's
literally don't know. That is an actual question. He might have tried to commit suicide. Someone else might have shot him. There's actually nothing in the show to suggest either way, other than a voice that no one's confirmed what the voice could be, what actually happened to him.
I thought it would have been interesting had the show ended with one of those characters deciding that, like, as several of them do, that their school is like an irredeemable cesspool of like sexism and bullying, and had like shut up the school. And had the next season like explore the reasons why they did that.
I mean, to me, that's what I'm almost positive that is in fact going to be the second season.
Yeah, because like spoilers, one character is like all the way to that path. He just like hasn't started shooting yet. So the fact that like that very much is the second season is a thing. I would say that like it's important to state that one of the risks for a show like this is, and it's very structured, the idea of I'll show them all. They will listen to what I tell them if I kill myself, and that is a way that I can get all of them back. That was always a very dangerous thing. And so this show always has to be judged against the risks that come from having this idea that is at a certain level arguably one form of a fantasy of someone who is downtrodden, who has a bunch of broken kind of failed relationships with friends, who's cried out for help in various ways, and those cries for help have all kind of failed. It is very dangerous, like as opposed to a version of this show where like half the characters are like whatever, they make jokes and they move on, because it does in a certain sense like there's a lot of rewards for suicide. It is an effective technique to get certain things, because a lot of people whom she disliked are now hurt. A lot of people whom she wanted to hurt now are aware of what they have done.
I mean, yeah. I will say this. I think there is somewhat this. I would make an argument the show does enough by the end to express that every part of those tapes isn't entirely just her vengeance spree. And it was also a statement of her regret, especially once you get especially once you get to the 13th tape. And oh my gosh, literally you're just gonna turn all the bass on, all of it, neighbors, just all of your bass, every bass,
all their bass are belong to you now,
all of them. I fucking hate my neighbors. Okay, sorry.
They're getting a tape. They're getting a tape.
They're not worth a tape. I'm not telling myself for them. Fuck them. Look, I do think the show did enough by the end to, especially by expressing what happened with the 13th tape, and that she kind of acknowledged like she had recorded all these as kind of like a way to get her own thoughts out, and it wasn't definitively something she was necessarily going to send out. And the 13th one has been pushed it, and she decided to do it, which was, I thought, more a reflection of like her own just fragile state than just entirely I'm going to show them and I'm going to make them pay. It was more like she was like, I'm going to send these out and it's going to hurt people. But like, I think the show I think this show at the end showed enough to show that she was damaged and guilt-ridden and didn't know what to do. And she did that, sure, but mostly out of just like she was sick. Similarly, along with line with that part of, when they show her actual suicide in the show, and it's an extraordinarily graphic thing, that is not a glorious thing at all. Like
it's not glorified, it's not glamorized, but I do think there's like an implicit. I do agree with Sam. There's an implicit thing in the premise and structure of the show, and I don't think the show does well enough either through intent or execution. I'm not sure which is responsible here, to kind of critique what she's doing, because like there's something very interesting when she finally commits suicide and her mother comes in. You see that like the bathroom door was unlocked, and I think that's indicative of something she does all season. Is she sets up these scenarios where like she knows she's in pain, she knows that she wants somebody to help her, but she gives them some kind of impossible task. She tells them to go away, she leaves the room, and then hopes that they'll come after her, rather than just like, you know, she's in that scene with the 13th guy, the teacher, and I'm like, you know, there are words you have to say here for him to take you seriously, and she's like not saying those words. You know, he offers her a real choice of like, well, you can prosecute your rapist or you cannot prosecute your rapist, and she takes that the wrong way, and then she's like, oh, I wish he would come after me. And the show's response to that really seems to be like both of those characters going, God, I wish I'd gone after her. And the same thing with like, you know, her and Clay in the bedroom at the party. It's kind of fucked up what she does, and I don't think the show really acknowledges that.
I mean, I'll agree with you on somewhat in that the show, I think they were too subtle with a lot of it, because I think they did do some of that, but they tried way too much to rely upon where you see her behavior and you have to like, but you're right, the show itself. I will say this though, when I first saw how she talked to the guidance counselor, I had to think about this, and I will say that it looks like at first he's not doing as much to do, but he still handled that poorly, because even if he gave her real choices, he didn't show the correct amount of like, there's an empathy level of things he should have gone with of trying to see how she was doing first that he just failed to do.
Well, his problem in that conversation is essentially that she walks into his office and basically says, I'm feeling depressed and suicidal. And he says, why? And she says, because I got raped. And he says, well, that's a new problem. Here's what you can do about that. And she walks out without him like remembering to go back and be like, oh wait, she's depressed and suicidal.
That's what I'm saying. He didn't like. He basically made the mistake of, instead of he didn't have the empathetic response he should have had to try to talk to her. He tried to be too focus oriented, and that is an actual problem, and like an example of him not thinking things through to a certain, which is why, you know, he went out of his way to be like, maybe I should just make sure no one ever knew about this meeting.
But it feels a little bit to me like the show, like she definitely thinks, and another character says, you know, this is what happens when girls ask for help. Like she feels like his response came from a place of like rape apology, where I don't think that it does. And I think that's part of I think that goes into part of the divide in the show of like, we are all complicit in rape culture, but a suicide ultimately comes down to that person's choice. And so the show like conflates those in a way I don't think is entirely successful.
Yeah, I mean that's true. And I will say that it was another example of them just being a little too subtle in terms of like, I think what they were trying to do was not do the stereotypical, as stereotypical, like the guidance counselor's completely not on her side and just throws her off. I think they were trying to show a more subtle version, because I think a lot of what this show wanted to show was more subtle things of what can lead to suicide. I'm not saying always successfully. Like Sam, before I let you kind of continue what you're going to say, like you brought up in your initial thing where it was like, you know, there really wasn't 13 reasons, there were 4 and these other ones. Well, I think that was just supposed to try to show, like you said, like the loss of her support structure was what led to those being even more devastating, and that's why she brought it. And I do think a lot of times, I will say there were a lot of tapes where she at least did kind of acknowledge that things weren't as big a deal. She definitely did with Zach. And I think even with the poem guy, she did at least acknowledge in that. I think she did acknowledge in the tape that it wasn't, it was just, it was a trust thing, but she wasn't literally trying to say he was as bad as the other person, but felt he had to be mentioned. But go ahead, Sam, say what you're going to say.
Sure. I was just going to say, you know, the one concern that I have with the show structurally is it's a point of view show, and whose point of view is present is always difficult, because even Clay says that's not how it happened. So, you know, there's that line, you know, that's not my truth. And
yeah,
the crucial scenes in the show, we don't get anyone else's perspective. And I really think that for a lot of these characters, like, you know, as the show continues, we in a certain sense we get less outside perspective, with the exception of Clay, because, you know, as it starts, we have you know specific things of Jessica, you know, other people saying like, you know, that, I have the note, she stopped coming first, all that. And so the question of, is this how she remembers it? Maybe she remembers it wrong, details. And some of the kind of critical moments, the show very much just shows on screen a story which appears to be hers. And that, and I really, it does complicate the problem of suicide, especially, and also, frankly, of rape culture, of, how do you handle situations in which both people have a different reality, and those two realities are not really easy to mix with each other. But as for the support structures, like I think that everyone is culpable in rape culture, and this is what happens when people have no support structures part worked fairly well. I think that the actual ending, very final third of like, this is what happened, didn't. But I have to say, since none of you brought it up yet, am I the only one who was super annoyed with the best friend who looks like he walked out of a 1950s movie and has all of these interesting like possible plots at the beginning of him, like, maybe he's in on it, maybe he's like beating people up for with his family, and they just like drop it later, and they're like, it turns out that he's an enforcer for his brothers, and he also happens to be gay, but he's like, but he's like that. The only one.
Yeah, that character is like one of the worst parts of the show.
Stop talking. You both stop talking for a second.
What's the matter?
I need to listen. I need to look at my sound wave for a second.
Okay.
I need to see how bad this fucking bass is affecting my sounds. Just be quiet. Everyone's talking. All right, cool. So it's just going to be there. It's going to suck. Our sound's going to be terrible this time. So enjoy.
Well, I can take your track and see if I can fix it. Don't worry.
So yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I needed to see how bad it was.
Sure. Yes.
I was.
Yeah. Let's talk, Sam.
Yeah. You asked if anybody. Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes. That character bugged the shit out of me. I think, like, as a show, like as a piece of entertainment, which is kind of a different conversation than we've been having, really. Like, the thing that hurts the show the most is just that, like, it chooses this mystery structure that means that, like, all of the actual, like, interesting parts of the show are back-ended. Like, there's a point at which we know that a rape happened, and everybody starts talking about Bryce as a rapist, and everybody in the present can have a real conversation about this instead of just like slamming each other up against walls and go, you keep the secret, you'll keep it. And Tony like really suffers from that, in that like at the end he's like a reasonable character who is just trying to help Hannah and like, was her friend and is trying to be a friend to Clay, and like, but yes, in the beginning he spends like 8 hours being like this like magical Latino character who just like shows up to follow him around mysteriously in a classic muscle car and say like wise Yoda things, and like, yeah, it's really kind of fucked up and terrible.
I mean, I will say that also, just to finish talking about Tony. Well, two parts. One, I'll say I actually understand why the show wants to make a second season from the perspective of, as Caillou said, now that everything's been addressed and we can deal in the present. There's like a lot of interesting directions you can go with this show now, and I could see why they want to keep going to be able to explore these characters, even though I'm pretty convinced what's going to actually happen is, since the show probably won't thinks its structure is what matters, it's probably going to be like there's a school shooting and the next 13 episodes are going to be recounting how that happened.
Yeah, because what we need is like a 13-hour Elephant remake.
I'm just telling you, like,
I
hope the show realizes that they don't need to do that, but I just, most shows when they have structures like this are afraid to let it go, and they probably won't, and so it probably won't happen. But as for Tony, I mean, yeah, the end stuff made up enough for his early character that I was fine with it, because he was such an interesting character, and I really liked the idea of, he was the one that helped really start. I thought he was one of the ones that helped also explore the idea of kind of like whether what Hannah wanted mattered, and he, his kind of realization of like what he was going through. And I mean, I do wish they maybe broken away for just one episode and had it be from Tony's higher perspective. Like, that's the only episode I really need an actual perspective on. It's just like the one entirely for his perspective, especially because then he could have had that part. Because you have that part where it's clearly destroying him, that he can't talk to anybody, and then finally he like caves and talks to his boyfriend, and it clearly helps him in some way. And then also later he can talk to Clay. When Clay finally watches all the tapes, since Clay is the slowest tape listener in existence and also shouldn't ride bikes.
It's the worst bike rider. Here's my question, like just from a plot perspective, like if she didn't have any support structure and had like lost all her friends, then like who was Tony to her? Was he not a friend that she could go to, even though she could go to him with this like tape, like this box full of revenge, and expect him to like enforce it after she was dead? Like it seems like he should have like been in her life at all.
No, I mean he said he kind of acknowledged, like, I mean, I think that was definitely a point of acknowledging. I mean, that's one of those ones where I think the show acknowledges, like, she says she has no support structure, but that was a clear point if she chose not to do anything else. That's she both pushed away Clay and she, like, you know, it's also, we don't get enough with the Tony part, since Tony basically says, like, she told me I needed to talk about something and I didn't want to deal with her, so I left her alone. And you don't actually, they actually don't have the scene this time of, like, it's showing her being like, you know, I thought he'd come after me because I don't think she cared. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it was, I thought that was the show. Her stuff, Tony was, I think, supposed to also show how selfish she was being by committing suicide. I mean, that's why a lot of his is supposed to be used, is how, like, even more so than anyone else, is just like to help. But it was, like I said, a subtle way of doing it that didn't entirely work the entire time. It still leads to tons of problems.
On another weirdest thing, his other friend dies, and that's like only covered in like one episode. And I think he mentions it in the next episode, but like that clearly is like almost no effect on him compared to Hannah.
No, it has an effect on him. The problem is that, I mean, I think its effect comes in that you now realize further why Clay is like losing his goddamn mind while listening to these tapes, because he's just not in a right mental state. But I agree that I think the show got hurt. I was okay-ish with the mystery structure, with the exception of, I think, how it applied to Jeff, his friend, because. You know, basically what you had was, you had the early part of the season where there was an acknowledgement that some other tragedy had happened.
Yes.
At like the very beginning of the season, no name was said. We lost 2 students. And then you're like, wait, why is Jeff never around? And then you don't get it. But I think the show could have done, because then also Jeff probably could have been around more. It could have like further allowed like to hit the fact that like this is one of Clay's like only real. Because like the way one reason I thought Clay was an effective, you know, I thought he was an effective protagonist was that he was supposed to represent that kind of guy in high school who maybe didn't necessarily have like a lot of close friends, but kind of got along with everybody. He was around. He was more or less a nice person, kind of person that seemed like he could, a lot more people could feel like they're relating to. And that if the show says, well, this is how he was ultimately culpable, even if it does it, but in other ways by he thinking it, other people will think that, because this show in itself is mostly supposed to really be more for, you know, not I guess people at risk for suicide. And I don't mean that in like a tongue-in-cheek of like, I mean, just in general, that like every show that's about suicide is really not for people who are having suicidal thoughts, since like statistically and scientifically it's been kind of proven that those are always terrible for the people who have them. Like, it doesn't help. There is no version of it, which is another moral problem.
Is the term social contagion still, or is there a different term we use for that now?
I don't entirely remember that. I mean, that may be correct.
I know it's called a suicide cluster when kids start killing each other and killing themselves, in part because once their friends have killed themselves, they realize suicide is an option, not an abstract idea. But I thought social contagion is a more general term.
You know, assuming that the kid at the end of the season killed himself is like one reason maybe not to inflict your tapes on everybody.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think by the end of the show at least made it clear. I agree that it had trouble with all the different like plates it was doing, but I think this show did kind of like acknowledge like these tapes, because Clay even himself was like, these tapes are fucked up. You know, Tony, you shouldn't have like done this. You should just given the tapes to the parents. And Coney kind of acknowledged it too, of like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have like gone through with this process. I should have like taken the tapes and just given them to our parents.
It's also like the tapes are an effective metaphor, but it's sort of like it doesn't really get at why and how rape culture actually works, because they're mostly not defending Bryce for like rape culture reasons. They're defending him because they're all like trapped together in this bizarre blackmail scheme.
Except for Justin, which is why, I mean, he's the part that made him somewhat work is he was defending him from a like, in Justin's mind, Bryce has legitimately been like a person who'd been there for him. And, you know, there's, you know, Jessica brings up this idea of like, you know, she did, you know, that was done to trap you. And based on the fact that Bryce is the worst, it's probably true. I will say that you know, you were right, Sam, the writing doesn't necessarily make Bryce anything more than a cartoon character. I argue that actor does give him a little bit of stuff.
I'm not insulting the actor. The actor is the only reason why I knew there could have been more. It frustrates me because the actor makes me feel like there is an explanation. In that moment where Justin walks away and Bryce is like, hey, are we good? And you realize that he like legitimately has no idea what's going on. He thinks that Justin is his friend. He thinks that like hooking up with Jessica was an appropriate thing to do. He thinks that he had sex with Hannah and she was willing, and like, yeah, this is the code of social etiquette of how we have sex in this society. Like, absolutely, there is a way to tell that character and his point. Like, if we talk about something like this, like I said before, you have to judge this show on an ethical level based on the ethics of like what harm it does, what good it does. An intrinsic amount of harm because of the social contagion suicide cluster risks, and it has to do a commensurate amount of good. Bringing up something from the point of view of like no one thinks they're a rapist, bringing up something from the point of view of like, this is why affirmative consent should be a thing. This is why maybe you should have sex less often when both parties are drunk. This is why maybe the entire playing hard to get social script is dangerous is dangerous on 100 different levels.
Yes,
like there's a way
the romance that they have is so dissatisfying on that level. Because it's so much like just you're like holding hands and going on dates, just like fucking be together and stop having this like stupid male-female dance of like, well, I can't ask you, you know, I have to turn him down and then he has to ask me out again in order for it to be real, and like
yeah. But that's well, like there's a way to make something on this Bryce character, and there's a way to by doing stuff from Bryce's point of view to teach valuable lessons to those who are likely to find themselves in situations like Bryce is in, and maybe they make different decisions. And that to me is one of the big failures of that character, is by always positing the rapist as like a cartoon villain, they don't actually do what they really need to do, which is tell young athletes why, yes, there are some really huge flaws with our current party culture. Maybe you should be the ones to change that.
Like Marcus, for instance, when he gropes her in the diner, that they don't really dig into that from his perspective in a way that like he clearly thinks that there's like not really anything wrong with that, and that's something that like people need to learn. Real quick, Sam, can you get away from screen sharing because it's like lagging and it's sort of affecting your actual audio? Thank you.
Look, let's not even get into Marcus. That's you know, Bryce, because of that actor, as Sam said, it's basically because of that one look he had when Justin walks away. Like, if you had to tell me more about Bryce's story next season, I could like care. I could like be like, oh, this is really interesting, and especially in relation to Justin. But like Marcus, I mean, to some degree, Courtney too. Just both those characters were just so infuriating the entire season. Like, those are the two that they failed so miserably.
Oh no, Courtney was a straight up, strikeout failure. Like, there is no redeeming of that.
It just, I mean, yeah, it's just like the character, the poem character, just like his like continuous incredulousness is Courtney's just like trying to defend things. He's like, "What is wrong with you?" And I'm like, "What is wrong with like what the hell?"
Pretty much everything they did with that character, from like, you know, the Asian overachiever to the like, you know, what's wrong? Why don't you just come out already? There's nothing you know, you're not going to take flack for being gay at this school full of bullying and sexism. Like, to the point near the end where she just turns into this very like hardline.
I do have to somewhat stand by again when it comes to the coming out one. That this is another example when the show just, you know, but like, I think the show mainly was trying to express the fact that since once again the only person who really seemed to make fun of people was both Bryce and that other terrible like Bryce surrogate who Alex got into a fight with, whose name I can't remember.
Bryce 2. Call it Bryce 2.
Yeah, Bryce 2, who I think isn't a rapist, so maybe that's his only redeeming quality. The show is probably turning in the fact that since most people have kind of acknowledged that, like, for kids under a certain age, this idea of like the idea of like homosexuality isn't as big a deal, but the show once again failed at properly like expressing that, or is, like you said, didn't show enough like with the school structure to suggest that wouldn't be a thing. So you're correct there. That was another example of, I think, where they thought that they didn't need to explain as much and they just kind of thought it'd be fine. And Clay saying it'd be fine, when not entirely true.
Yeah, and it also, like, I mean, that comes around to my annoyance with the way that they portray responsibility, because, like, you know, if you were gonna give a tape to the like 12 worst actors in this story, like 8 of them would be like the random guys who were like groping her or like saying shit in the hallway. But instead, like, most of them are like people who didn't help her enough, people who didn't see how wounded she was. And it doesn't feel like the show differentiates enough between the show's perspective and her perspective, where it's much more understandable that she's like more wounded at her friends like not seeing her pain than she is at just like the random assholes.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, I guess in the show's mind, it's like by saying this random asshole, it kind of represents all of them. But it is true that since like only Bryce was that terrible, and his tape isn't even really kind of, it's like done in such a weird way, as opposed to, like, I think Sam.
I'm not sure she even like addresses him directly in her tape.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I think one thing that also, like, I do wonder what would have happened if maybe they had changed the Justin character to where, because the Justin character almost is everything, Sam, you're talking about, except, you know, he didn't actually rape somebody. And so I almost wonder if it would have been almost more effective to have done the affirmative consent stuff you're talking about with him, since almost every other level, he basically has a lot of those like beats that you wanted from that character.
I mean, the Justin character is very interesting. I feel somewhat like the Justin character came from a movie like 20 years prior, where some of the ideas of like at one point, like you know, a teacher says, you know, I suspect physical abuse at home, and like and there's a girl, and the mother has lots of boyfriends. And I have to wonder, like, in the grand scheme of actors, etc., there are very real questions of like, why is everyone like just letting Justin essentially be adopted by Bryce? Why is social services not a thing? There's all these things where there is a difference between the shitty and between the shitty that we have decided as a society to have laws against. And a lot of the stuff that goes down with Justin that's implied or stated of his past goes way further into the, like, we kind of have support structures that are actually legal support structures to make that you don't end up as like owned people because, you know, you like owe people for basketball shoes, so you like let them do bad things to your girlfriend. Like,
there's a certain respect in which like the show does a very bad job of explaining why of pointing a real finger, like it seems like it wants to do, at all of the adults and parents in the situation for sort of abdicating their responsibility. It doesn't feel like they've abdicated their responsibility. It feels like these kids were like, you know, are too devoted to like omerta and will not like go to a parent and be like, I got raped, something happened. You know, this dude is bullying me. Like the number of times the show where I was like, it's not the parents' fault. They've tried, like, every scene in this that they're in is them going, tell me what's wrong and I can help. Tell me what's wrong and I can help. It's very frustrating to see the kids not do that. And yet I feel like the show like still feels like, oh, you know, the school didn't do enough and the parents didn't do enough. And it's like, no, these systems are in place and you just have to reach out.
No, the school didn't do enough. I'm not letting the school off the hook. No. That school is like, that principal, even if it's just because the principal's terrible, that school didn't do enough.
It's hard to, I agree they didn't do enough, and there are like things in the show where like kids are having fights in the hallways, and instead of being broken up by a teacher, they're broken up by like Bryce. And I'm like, why is this hallway like fucking the Wild West? And it ends up, but I don't think it explains why that's the case, like why this school is so shitty.
No, I agree on that. I just felt I had to say, like, to suggest the school wasn't to suggest the school did enough is ridiculous.
Sam, that's amazing.
I have one larger problem with this show, which is, in my experience of reading news stories about stuff like this, there's like 2 known, basically, group text sexting things for Hannah and 1 for another character. And when that happens, someone tells their parents tell the police, and it's basically a child pornography investigation at that point. So this is also a weird thing in which, in terms of like, you know, outside of the fact that like these 16 and 17-year-olds look 28, have basically 25-year-old parties where like everyone's parents are going to
now look 28. That's an overstatement.
everyone but Clay looks much older than they should. Like Bryce does look 30 in my opinion. But I was gonna say that like my point is more
fine.
Yes, they have like giant like Wolf of Wall Street kind of house parties.
And it's like how. But my point is the actual sexting thing, because sexting is part of how this story starts. That does not. I am not a high school student, so I can't say if that has changed and if sexting is way more common than I've been told. But fairly frequently, when those go outside of relatively small groups, someone tells their parents, because a fair number of parents like reserve rights to look at their kids' phones and see this, and they call the police. And the fact that there wasn't a like child pornography police investigation for sexting, or the fact that the school didn't know, why yes, Hannah was the girl from that sexting incident, last year, is something that to me breaks into this like, this is not.
Well, the other characters don't treat it like that either. Like even Hannah is like, she's concerned about the rumors, and it seems like the show kind of used the initial sexting incident as like a way to just like dramatize how those rumors got started, when like rumors just start sometimes because people are assholes.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, and I will say it was kind of ridiculous that they would just keep having the scenes where like somehow everyone has access to everyone's phone number in the school, which. It wasn't like, it'd be one thing if it was like the circle, but it was kind of like everyone in school. And I was sometimes like, that's not really how that works. Like, that's not how phones work. There's not like a magic number that texts all high school students. But I will say, I do know that the sexting stuff I think was added because this book was obviously written like enough far back that sexting wasn't really a thing. So it wouldn't shock me if they wanted to add this and just didn't entirely think it all the way through. And like, we're like, we want to add this because we think this is an important thing to touch upon. But then like, there were certain like I somewhat buy that maybe one of these scandals or one of these things could get away with for a while without like getting out, because like, I think you're both kind of applying too much like adult logic to high schoolers who don't make smart decisions. I know I certainly did when I was in high school. So like, I'm not going to like sit here and say that I would have necessarily, people would have at all times done certain things that we think is obvious now.
I mean, teens are dumb, but teens are dumb is like not an effective message for child. Hang on one second. The show is trying to make like broader cultural critiques than just like teens are dumb, I think.
No, I know, but I'm just saying like Sam's asking questions like, how did this happen without this happening? I'm like, well, to some degree that is.
Sam, you have to stop doing that because it makes a.
Oh, is that Sam?
Do that? Yes.
Okay, that's why I thought that was me.
It makes a noise, Sam. Don't do that.
It does.
It does when I have a new message. It dings.
It absolutely did on mine as well. Yeah, I don't even know.
Okay, I'll stop doing that.
What is Sam doing? I'm not saying
like texting us like
that is the 13. That's 13 reasons why.
Wait. Oh, is he doing something through Hangout? I'm really not paying attention to anything else that's happening because Sam is being distracting, so I have all my windows down.
13 reasons why.
That's why. God damn it, Sam. Okay.
My Little Tony is funny, but that's just a not down with premature. I want to say.
Well, hold on. Let me just restate the thing that Sam. Okay. No, I mean I agree with you. I'm just saying that like Sam's expressing like why was this not brought up more and why isn't? I do think that is part of it, and they probably didn't make it enough clear. But to me that was enough for a reason where I understood why some of the stuff didn't get brought up, and it didn't bother me as much that like there wasn't as much an investigation. Other than that, I think having brought those up on a more like official level would have helped further reinforce how terrible this school was, since like kind of by the end of the point it's supposed to be this school is like shit and like should feel bad and everyone part of it should feel bad, and like if they had had more things like a more official investigations into things and how like the school had covered up, it would have at least I think made that part more clear. But we have covered I think quite a bit about this show, and there's not really a good definitive answer on a lot of this stuff, to be fair. So like we've just kind of let some stuff come out there, but we'll kind of do like final thoughts and then move on to something less, well, I'm not going to say, well, it will be less divisive, but also just less, complicated and intricate to talk about. Since I'm gonna be honest, this show is so, the landmines and like moral questions this show brings up could honestly be like 12 podcasts. So,
You mean 13 podcasts?
nope, I said 12 for a reason, because this is obviously already a podcast. But Josh, why don't you go first?
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. But so, Josh, I think you had already wanted to say something anyhow, so why don't you go first and just kind of finish up?
Sure. I'll bring up a new point that we didn't talk about before. Just like as a piece of entertainment, I feel like the show could have benefited just from like being weirder and more stylistic. Like there's a lot of things that it does direction wise that are frustrating because they're cliche or repetitive. Like there's one episode where like the show does that thing where a character is daydreaming and then somebody yells their name and they snap back and go what, and they go, oh, I was saying was this, and it's like after the 8th time I was like, please stop. But the show, like, there's some absolutely direct references to Donnie Darko in the show, in an interesting way. Particularly like the end of, I think, episode 12. There's like a montage to a cover of the Echo and the Bunnymen song at the beginning of Donnie Darko, that's sort of connecting the idea of like a character fated to die with like society that's a social structure that's like doomed her. And I feel like Donnie Darko is like more emotionally expressive and cinematically stylistic of these kids' emotions in a way that the show could have definitely benefited from.
All right, Sam.
It's an American TV show that I finished, and that means something. Like I don't watch a lot of shows. Like one thing that Netflix has down is it is imminently bingeable. It's imminently willing to say, I want to see the next reason. I want play to finish the next goddamn tape. And that does something. So the fact that, I will just leave it with, I think the opening in a version in which Clay is the villain, in which Tony is actually like a secret mafia enforcer who's like sold her organs and is, defrauding the family. I think some weird Twin Peaks version of this story would have been much more interesting, because I feel like all of the answers to these mysteries were kind of like the Butler did it answers to, yes, high school is shitty. Yes, rapist jock is rapist. Yes, being shitty to your friends means you weren't there for them to help them, as opposed to being an actually interesting mystery where like, it turns out that like, Hannah's alive and like living with Bryce, or like there's a bunch of really interesting places this show could have gone if it was willing to go, true true Lynch awesomeness.
And this is why, once again, I have to say that, making the show just fit Sam's taste would have led to ruin. So I'll just finish up by kind of saying the one thing I found with the show is that it was a weird combination of bingeable. Like, I definitely did binge through it, but I actually felt like I shouldn't have, because the early part not as much, but by the end, when like the actual like events, and especially because of how graphic a lot of the stuff they showed, you have, especially the episodes that have the trigger warnings and are now getting even more extreme version of the trigger warnings because they weren't extreme enough, and also the show itself didn't have one.
Yeah, that's the downside of the Netflix binge model, is only realizing that at like 9 hours in that you should not be watching the show.
Well, it wasn't so much that I shouldn't be well, that is true, and that is a danger with what we said with the people who shouldn't be watching the show. But yeah, there was a part where I was just like, I watched it, and then was just kind of like, David, stop! You shouldn't be watching like 5 of these episodes in a row. It's not good. Especially, you talked about stylistically. I like the fact that they basically had like a director be assigned to 2 different episodes, and it made it look a little different. But it is true that at a certain point they kind of didn't do enough with that, and only some of the directors seemed to actually take advantage of that, whereas some of the other ones were more willing to just try and make it look like the other people's stuff. Which is a little bit.
The show has a lot of like interesting symbols and visuals that it doesn't really take advantage of, like the fallen stop sign and like Clay's open wound and different things like that. It just kind of like lets sit there on the page.
Yeah. But, I ultimately did enjoy this show quite a bit, and I think if nothing else, I think this could be a really important show going forward. It seems to open up a lot of discussions about from a lot of different angles about how we should address suicide, how we should look at, the rape culture stuff. I agree hasn't been talked about as much, which is probably why like they kind of muddled those together. But I do think from the suicide perspective, it has opened a lot in terms of like whether this type of show is how you should show the show, who should watch it. kind of like gives a grander like discussion about these things, and I found that useful. And the fact that the show, at least at some level, was also entertaining to watch, despite like also being brutal to watch, was a nice touch. And if nothing else, it's the kind of show I think Netflix should look into making more of. Just they need to learn from some of the mistakes from this and maybe do things a little differently in the future. Or I guess in Sam's case, make it more like a David Lynch film. So who knows? But we're gonna move on now from this. Like I said, we could keep talking about this for a while, and Lord knows.
Look, 13 Peaks is a great idea for a TV show.
And Lord knows at some level,
Netflix made a Twin Peaks show. It was that like werewolf thing.
Yeah, it's not.
And I loved it.
Please don't talk about Hemlock Grove, which only like Sam and 4 other people watched, which is absolutely not true. For a while, that was like the most watched thing on Netflix. But we're going to move on now to movies. And now we're going to go on to, I guess, a what's been happening in movie segment. So we're going to go way back towards the beginning of the year and talk about M. Night Shyamalan's actual real return to being relevant with Split. And we might say one or two things about Lego Batman. But we're going to start with Split. And Sam, how are you dealing with the world in which M. Night Shyamalan is at least somewhat successful as a director again?
I mean, we always knew he had it in him. We always knew that when he did small, controlled films that he wrote himself, and he wasn't essentially steering the Titanic of hundreds of millions of dollars of special effects, that he had some choices there. The fact that like he managed to find himself back to back doing very expensive films that kind of have the Alien 3, Alien 4 problem of you are no longer truly in control. It's a special effect, and you have to fight for control in a way that you don't have to fight when you have 5 actors and a camera and some wood.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely like. I after seeing Split, I went back and watched The Visit, which I hadn't caught, and that is also like a little less so than Split, but it's like a moderately successful movie because it's a simple premise. It's a restrained location. One of his talents is getting good performances out of actors, getting good performances out of child actors, and just like directing the camera. And yeah, I mean, he was absolutely the wrong person to throw like Avatar at, and it resulted in disaster. And so it's good to see him like getting back to his roots.
It was especially a bad time. It was especially bad timing to throw it at him because his own writing had failed him pretty immensely at that point too. So he was all around just in a bad place. And it made me sad that I remember when he first took. The Last Airbender, since they can't call it Avatar anymore because it gets confused with the somehow, I guess, slightly better Avatar, but still also not great Avatar by James Cameron. That was the point in which it was very clear that Shyamalan needed to stop writing for a while and like direct stuff, and then his decision was to direct 2 things he clearly couldn't direct. Yeah. To the point that whatever, I don't even remember what was it. It's not Another Earth. What was it?
After Earth, which
After
I still haven't
Earth
seen.
Was like, but my point is like he wasn't even advertised as part of the movie. They pretended he wasn't even there. Like I had to be told. Like I remember when I saw he was directing it, I was like, wait, this hasn't been spoken about, because at that point everyone was just done with him, and like he was literally a negative for that.
Well, there's literally a point a movie or two back where the trailer was like from M. Night Shyamalan, and theaters would just laugh.
Yeah, I mean, well, you make The Happening, and this happens because, making plants evil and not in a Little Shop of Horrors ways doesn't really work. Especially if they just end.
Look at that Mark Wahlberg performance. If you manage to put the Nicolas Cage, not the bees performance like a run for its money. I mean, really, he was very clearly trying to compete with Nicolas Cage's greatest horror film of all time.
Mark Wahlberg is a mathematician, for sure.
Please don't. Just everything that's just been said is bringing me pain. All of it. Everything.
But anyway, it's all turned around now with Split, which was really two movies. For 95% of the movie is like a really cool new like thriller / like psychological kind of torture porn sort of movie. Sans the torture, but it still feels a lot like that. Kind of the kidnapping, like, you know, a pulpy, like campy version of Room. And then the other 5%, which like turns it around on its head into, you know, final spoiler warnings, a superhero movie as the like decades on sequel to one of his best movies, Unbreakable.
I mean, it was his best movie, but sure.
Well, I'm not gonna have that argument now.
Yeah, I know.
I go back and forth. That's all.
But
right, it's a masterpiece.
That's fine. You can have that, but you know, I'm fine with saying it's his best movie, so it's whatever.
Okay.
But that's because, to be fair, what you think his other best movie is so wrong because you're crazy. That's why I have to bring it. Yeah, no, I mean that. I'm gonna be honest. I actually got spoiled about the ending of Split before I saw Split, but that's actually what made me want to go see Split. So it was like this weird thing where, like, before I was like, whatever, this is like, I mean, I was kind of interested because of the McAvoy performance potentially, but then finding out that like the one thing I've have almost no issues with that Shyamalan made was going to have a follow up, like, really excited me. I mean,
now, were you disappointed as to like how little of the film referred to that, or how like disconnected that is from the rest of the movie?
No, I really, the fact that it was connected at all, like, made it worth watching to me. Now, my problem with it is that I'm still concerned, and we'll get, I guess, a little bit of also just talking about, they have officially announced they're making another Unbreakable. You know, they're going to bring back, you know, Samuel Jackson back, Bruce Willis back, and then McAvoy back. My only concern is, because of how long it's been, I really hope there's another character who's going to be involved in this, because, like, 60-something-year-old Bruce Willis punching James McAvoy in the face is not the most interesting movie for me at this point. I'll just say.
I mean, look. Only if Ben Affleck's on his Batman will I watch it. I think that, you know, Ben Affleck, I'm doing his version of Batman. I think he'll do a great job. I think he'll really tie the DC universe together.
Do we know if Bruce Willis's character's mother's name is Martha or not?
It probably is. Let's just be honest.
I think it's important. I think it's very important. Look, this is an interesting idea. I'm Breakable and Split essentially works. These that start as one thing, and 3/4 way through the film or longer when they get to Split, it becomes obvious that it's something else. And you've like, yes, I'm going to reinvent superheroes. I'm going to reinvent villains from the ground up. Great.
Okay,
the idea of like when you walk in,
and
you know what's a hero and what's a villain. I have Shyamalan's ability to make that work.
Sam?
Yes.
Is it sounding weird on your end, Caillou, or is it?
Yeah, it's sounding weird, but I think it's the connection, not the audio. I think his audio is probably fine.
Okay, that's why I was trying to catch it. Then he didn't hear me, and he just kept talking. So I don't know. I guess that stuff's fine.
I heard. Okay, I guess it's fine.
It's fine. I might have to go in and like cut out us like yelling your name while you were talking, but we'll
yeah, that was the part I was making sure of. All right. Okay, I guess, are you done with your point, Sam, or do you want to keep going?
Yeah, no, I mean, at no point, I have serious doubts that Shyamalan is capable of executing something when you walk in knowing who's going to be punching who and who's what, because part of the joy of both of those films, and one of the joys of most of Shyamalan's films, is this kind of realization halfway through the film that he's been setting something up that makes perfect sense, but you weren't expecting from the trailers.
But I think that I have faith in. It sounds weird to say. I have faith in Shyamalan. I feel like he will find a way to subvert expectations in some fashion. He's just now beginning with a different set of expectations.
Yeah, I mean, my only concern really for the Unbreakable, I guess Unbreakable 2.
I think they're calling it Glass.
They're going to call it, or Unbreakable 3 or Glass. My only concern is. Since McAvoy is such a joy as being so many characters, the fact that he'll be a more like, I hope he figures out a way to at least let him be, you know, more of the alters than just like the 4 at the end. And possibly even introduce, you know, since he was supposed to have like, what, 20 something and we only saw like 10. like actually show who those people are.
Yeah.
Would be actually pretty interesting.
I think we're going to see that. I don't think Shyamalan's going to leave that on the table. But I mean, about Split itself, I mean, I think it is a really fantastic performance from McAvoy. He really throws himself into it, into the child roles, and you know, the scarier alters, the points when it's one alter pretending to be another. You know, the great moment when he his like original personality emerges briefly and is like, "What has been happening to me for the past several years? You need to kill me now because this is awful." You know, I think that's one of the best parts of that movie. Although I also like the girl a lot. I think she's really good in that film.
Yeah, I know. Anya Taylor-Joy is like great. And quite frankly, part of my problem is that I actually want her to be in the next movie. I find potentially her way more interesting than literally every other actor that they're bringing back. McAvoy, except for kind of McAvoy. I certainly find her more interesting than 6-year-old Bruce Willis at this point.
There's an interesting aspect to that film that she's sort of set up as like the resourceful heroine who's going to use her past traumas to kind of rise above and learn to survive and defeat McAvoy. And then that's all subverted at the end in that, you know, basically he attacks her and sees that she's has these scars and just kind of leaves to the sequel where like Bruce Willis will fight these battles potentially. Did you think that was an interesting like subversion of her arc?
I mean, I thought at least. Well, Sam and I had a little bit of a discussion about this after the film. It kind of depends on if I never see her again. It's based on me having to assume the following, which is she got the strength to like presumably move on with her life and like, you know, not allow the abuse to happen anymore. We think, and so Sam and I are both sitting there going, okay, this is fine as long as there's that part where the policewoman's like, you know, your guardian's here, and she has this look. And I'm hoping that look was, I have things to tell you about how terrible my guardian was because you're all here and I'm not letting us in, as opposed to Sam and I are slightly concerned that it's like, he's right, being damaged is great. I'm going to allow my abuse to keep happening so I can gain like psychokinesis powers.
I mean, look, her being the secret like hero of Glass, where she comes up saying, "I went back, all the abuse made me strong. You know, it's revenge time." That's an interesting movie, and I guess reconfirms everything we said about Shyamalan during, let's call it the happening years. But
the dark times.
You know.
But I mean, like, I think it's. I don't think that the film is necessarily making that message because of the way like it so clearly sets up, you know, her flashback of like she has the gun, she's pointing it at the man who's trying to hurt her, and she can't shoot, and then she has grown enough to the point in the present when she is able to shoot, and it does nothing. So I don't think that the film is necessarily saying that, like, you know, the trauma itself is, you know, a good thing. I don't think it necessarily looks at McAvoy and says like his mental illness is a good thing just because he has, you know, these superpowers now. I think that that's, you know, it's a dark thing.
As I said, I agree with you on this. Just why I said the subversion actually was interesting and still worked to me because like she still gained something from this, even if it wasn't she became the triumphant,
right?
Like the triumphant heroine who stopped things single-handedly. And she did hold him off and like, you know, figure out some things, but like it's more just that like I just had to bring up the fact that there was, because it's Shyamalan and because they don't really do much more with that scene, like there is just enough there to suggest that like her actual reaction to all this could in fact be something terrible as opposed to like an interesting, like useful thing.
I mean, she may come back. It may be a sign that she's going to come back because I'm trying to think of like another Shyamalan movie that ends with a moment of actual ambiguity like that, and I'm not coming up with one.
I mean, it's hard to say the problem with her is that like she is like becoming like kind of like a modern day like horror heroine, like
in Ingenue.
Ingenue, yes. I mean, like she was in The Witch, and she's been in this, and like she's basically like kind of slowly stepping up to like really fill that role, and so it's one of the things could just be that, you know, they may not be able to get her for another movie, which would be sad. And my response is actually, I think bringing someone like her back is more important than honestly the nostalgia tour of the other people. even if, like, I will say one thing that does give me some hope with this Unbreakable in general is that Shyamalan has acknowledged that, like, originally Split was in Unbreakable, basically.
Mhm.
Like a version of Split, like, instead of doing the murder he had in the movie, it was basically going to be the McAvoy character.
Well, there's that line in Unbreakable that may be an artifact of that, where the mother says, like, you know, in comics there's always two villains. There's the one who fights the hero with his fists and the one who fights with his mind. And that might have been a reference to that film originally having like two bad guys in it.
Yes. And so, like, I mean, it still does have, I mean, it has 1.5 bad guys, I guess.
It really no, it's got one bad guy. What other bad guy are you talking about?
There's some thugs. I mean, he beat up the thugs.
He has, like,
but they're just generic criminals. They're not really.
Well, no,
like,
right. He does have the dude who almost drowns him.
I mean, but that's just a fucking dude. That's not.
But that dude, that dude is also a murderer who, like he has a somewhat.
I'm not saying that dude isn't a bad dude. I'm saying that dude is not like a super villain the way that, like, Mr. Glass is a super.
Look.
But he's like
everyone
shits
on Killer Croc. Killer Croc is still a legitimate villain. Killer Croc's, you know, primary motivations of punching people and eating them and throwing cars at them is a real thing.
Right. I'm just saying Killer Croc has like a colorful. Killer Croc has a name and like a brand and a colorful ethos and like a costume. These are required things. He's not just an ex-con in a jumpsuit.
But
like, hey, so McAvoy's character has literally no clothing now because he's naked. So therefore, he has no brand.
He calls himself the Beast. That's enough. He does some myth building throughout the film.
He eats people like Killer Croc. So there's that.
I'm just saying, yeah. I will watch a movie, another movie where McAvoy's the villain. I'm not going to watch a movie where, like, a dude who broke into a house and killed people is the villain. That's not my idea of a good time.
It's called Funny Games or many other films, but B.
And I've never watched that either. I'm not fucking gonna. Because fuck that movie.
I really want to watch M. Night Shyamalan's version of Suicide Squad, because I feel like that's what I really want. I want to see M. Night Shyamalan's version of Killer Croc.
I will say you brought up an interesting point, though, and that's kind of the other problem with the Bruce Willis thing, which is there's like a part of me that's like, if they do this movie, and let's say it is just like straight up Bruce Willis versus the Beast, if it's called Glass, that means Jackson's going to be, you know, significantly more important. There's a part of me that's like, so can McAvoy just win then? Sounds way more interesting. Because, like, I'm just going to be honest. It could just be that, like, older.
It turns out I wanted it more.
It could just be that older age Bruce Willis has annoyed me so much that, despite the fact that I really like his character Unbreakable, I just can't buy Bruce Willis as, like, that kind of humble person anymore because I know what, like, such an asshole he is in real life.
Well, that to me is, like, the really interesting thing about the sequel is that, like, of no superhero sequel in history has had this situation where, like, the most interesting aspect to me is, like, how they're going to explore, like, his character and his family relationships, and, like, does he still have, like, a sense of, like, disappointment, or has he been the superhero the whole time? Like, I'm really interested to see, like, the beginning of that movie that I assume will be, like, Bruce Willis, like, having a different kind of sadness to him, or not, or why he doesn't.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that is true. All right, I guess that's enough about Split. It's a fun movie. We all actually enjoyed it to various degrees.
We liked it, but now we have to split.
Yeah, and you know, it's a good thing that M. Night Shyamalan is. I guess I'm happy that he seems to have kind of figured things out again. Because even if I never liked him as much as some people did, what was happening during the happening in the Dark Ages was just sad. So
yeah, now he's back at his goddamn wheelhouse. He should just stay at his wheelhouse.
Just make everything with Blumhouse. That's the answer. Blumhouse is the answer to all things. All right, so like I said. We're also going to, I guess, briefly, we'll just kind of touch on Lego Batman. I'll just simply say that, you know, it was fun. I actually, since I'm not as huge a fan of the Lego movie as other people are, I actually enjoyed this more than the Lego movie. But that's just because this movie, I felt, actually embraced what the Lego movie's best parts were and didn't try to add in a bunch of unnecessary things with real people and childhood. So yeah,
the live action aspect of the Lego movie is, like, definitely the weakest part of that, and Lego Batman is way better for not trying for any of that.
Yeah, and you know, I thought the family stuff it did in Lego Batman also worked better than the stuff in the Lego movie.
There's so many. I mean, there's so much love about the Lego Batman movie. Like, it's the action scenes are so kinetic and exciting, and the animation is still gorgeous. But it has really compelling takes on a lot of these classic Batman characters. I mean, it's Will Arnett's Batman in this movie is like he's really a version of Batman that we haven't seen before, and yet it feels very much like Batman because he's taking all these aspects and heightening them to a comedic place of like Batman being very sort of self-important and self-entitled and kind of myopic and aggrandizing in all these different ways. That's really funny and yet also feels very true to a certain spirit of Batman. Maybe on kind of the opposite end of like, you know, the Frank Miller or Christopher Nolan, like grimy, growly Batman. Michael Cera's Robin is also amazing in that regard.
I mean, he still growls. It's just funny.
Yeah.
I loved the moment where it became obvious in the film that when you behave the way Batman does, people don't look up to you. The actual Justice League is like, he's not fun to be around. He's not pleasant. We're not going to invite him to things because like, no, you know, the idea of like, you know, the Flash, he's a cool dude. Superman might be boring, but Superman's a genuinely nice guy. The idea of like, you know, being a dark, edgy loner all of the time, it turns out you end up kind of cold and alone, I think is one of the most interesting things that this movie brought into the Batman mythos of like, we all like to watch the story about Batman, but we shouldn't want to be Batman because Batman is usually pretty unhappy in most variations of it, in most versions of his like construction.
Oh no! In fact, him being Batman it's actually a key plea to Batman that him actually being Batman makes it impossible for him to be happy.
Yeah. So the idea of like, if you're unhappy and you use people as objects, and Batman has done both of these things, then eventually you're just going to be like a dick is pretty good. I also did love the moment in which Robin was like, I'll do what Batman does. I'll, you know, ignore everyone else and cause lots of property damage. Like, it's like yes, you will.
I will say I gave them a movie credit for kind of acknowledging, I mean, I'm still annoyed they aged up Barbara, but to do this, but at least is happy that they didn't actually try to make a romance happen, and in fact actively like made it clear that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, I think like the level at which it's pitched for kids really does like allow it to skirt around some of the pitfalls of adapting Batman that a lot of other things have fallen into. I also like I thought like it's although I didn't think that the voice performance was anything like that great. The actual writing of the Joker I thought was really entertaining with his like ridiculous bromance and kind of jealous love-hate relationship that he has with Batman. That was pretty entertaining.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a nice subtext base, like performance and writing there of kind of like going like, this is kind of the subtext of their relationship. And if you really strip away a lot of like the terrible stuff from it. But like, so like, yeah, I thought that worked. I mean, like you said, being a kids movie meant they could actually make a version of a Batman who makes a decision to be happy and can actually be happy, since the comics will never allow it to happen.
It's sort of I haven't read a ton of the Bat Family like stuff, but from what I understand, it's a lot more like kind of Batman softens a little bit rather than like Batman is like horribly dysfunctional with these people. And I think that that made more sense in this context.
Yeah, they figure out ways of like blending him with them, and they use the right mix of people who kind of can. But yes, he's not the one who kind of connects them, and it's just he doesn't. Generally speaking, like in fact, there's quite frankly, I mean, if you just the two examples of obviously the Nolan films, literally he only becomes happy when he stops being Batman, and then and there's another in the New 52 stuff. They literally do an entire storyline in which they bring a new Batman in, and like Bruce is amnesiac. And they make a big deal about how like he can get back his old he's not Batman anymore. He's like happy and he's gonna get married, and then he effectively chooses to become Batman again and just like throw away all his happiness. Because Batman can't be happy, he can't have anything. Because if he does, apparently it ruins everything and all stuff because writers are lazy. Sam, did you have anything else to add?
The animation was good as it tends to be, and the shark repellent was important. I would have been 0 stars. Would not recommend if I hadn't appropriately handled the shark repellent.
Yeah, I really enjoyed all the references they threw in, not just to Batman and in that like epic montage of Alfred spooling backwards the entire history, but but also all of the other characters they brought in and like Voldemort and stuff. Like that's just good old fashioned fun at the movies.
Yeah, I enjoyed also when it shows all the different costumes he has. And, like,
Yeah.
that's how I kept picking him. I thought was pretty good. And just yeah, I mean, a lot of it worked really well. Like I said, there's a reason why I enjoyed a lot of what I think a lot of other people enjoyed from the original LEGO movie. I actually got that enjoyment from this one that I didn't entirely get as much from the original one. So,
I mean, I would love to see other LEGO movies like take on this kind of like franchise like encapsulation, because I think they do a really good job with it. And I mean, I feel like this is like definitely like not at all like the worst Batman movie, just as a Batman movie. It's
yeah.
really good.
And these writers, like the team that seems to be behind the LEGO movies in general, like now that Warner Brothers has like set aside a group whose job is the LEGO movies, seems to be rubbing off on like the other parts. Like I remember when I saw the Batman movie, I saw a preview for like the Ninjago movie, which was like whatever. But even in that preview, there was a funniness and crispness to it that like clearly comes from this being a brand now that they actually understand. So like, if they want to keep making other stuff, I'm fine with it, because it seems like regardless of who they have in the direct and stuff, like they have a kind of like a mini, almost like Pixar-esque team in terms of like a group of creative people who are helping make it stay funny no matter what, and using the Legos correctly and using the stuff that had made a lot of people who like the video game version, like make the movie versions work as well.
But plus this seems like the only way DC will ever make good movies.
Well, I mean, Warner Brothers. I mean, I don't know who. Look, I don't know who to blame for the DC part of the Warner Brothers thing. Neither one gets off the hook here. Who knows? But all right, so that's kind of some covering of all movies. We'll come back to in future episodes talking, like I said, more TV and movies that we've kind of missed so far. The only thing we have left to do is I think Caillou needs to ask a very important question.
Boo! It's nothing but trash. Welcome again to our longtime fan favorite segment, where we discuss Hayao Miyazaki's statement that anime was a mistake. It's nothing but trash, and we do that by delving into the anime that we've all watched recently. And I can actually contribute this time, but we'll start with Sam first. Sam, what have you seen lately? And on a scale of 1 to trash, how trash was it?
So I recently watched Arrow Manga Sensei, and I'm struggling here because the limits of human language really limit my ability to express how much this show is trash. This is based on manga by the same author who did the show who the manga called I Can't Believe My Little Sister Is This Cute, and it is once again a show about sister loving. So it's also a show about sister loving in the context of the little sister is also a like erotic like illustrator, and the premise is that the main character is a writer of trashy, terrible, like light novels, basically like anime style books, and he discovers that his reclusive illustrator whose name is Arrow Manga Sensei. Arrow means erotic in this context, so it's basically like having a pen name of like porno drawer is in fact his little sister. I'd go on further about how and why it's trash, but I can't. Like, if you don't understand why this is, I don't mean like bad as a like statement of quality. I mean bad as a moral imperative in the fact that this work exists and the fact that the world like lets this work continue to be made. It's that.
With regard to sibling love, why is Japan like the world's Alabama?
In most of it, honestly, is because the gender roles have broken down so terribly in Japan that a lot of Japanese male nerds could only foresee a situation in which they meet a girl is if their parents essentially bring one home as a family member, because the idea of meeting a girl in any other way is foreign to them.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's all reflect on whatever part we may have had to play in this, whatever our tape is here for watching or even thinking about the show, and move on to David. What have you seen lately, and how trash was its trashness?
Well, Sam went off book a little bit, and so we'll have to actually do the real version of this segment. So I'll have to now do the same thing and just end it properly to not allow you to say something. But I guess the last anime I technically watched would be. Technically the last thing I watched was Attack on Titan. That's boring to talk about. So Instead, I will talk about Grand Blue Fantasia or Fantasy, Grand Blue Fantasy, which is an anime based off a phone game. So, you know,
always a recipe for success.
I mean, it's not trash in the way that Sam just described, because, you know, it doesn't have garbage spewing forth at all case. It's just, you know, quality speaking, not great.
What's it about?
I mean, it's a generic fantasy thing about basically like there's this mysterious girl, because this is based off a phone game, who can use magic to summon like beings from crystals, which in the phone game is kind of what you pay money to order, you know, to get more monsters from. So in this, she can summon creatures. She meets the dude named Gran. They like become one. They start sharing one heart, and you know they go on adventures. I mean, it's pretty generic.
Can they use like Apple Pay to get more crystals?
I mean, you know, they don't have to use Apple Pay. They can do whatever they want. But I would certainly have to use Apple Pay to get more crystals if I wanted to play as them. Yes.
We all want more crystals. I can talk about something that's actually not trash, but is actually anime, because I watched a Japanese animated movie, which is anime, right? Yes.
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 Maybe.
I watched Satoshi Kon's Paprika, and it was super good.
I know, but Sam and I both know.
Well, then I'm gonna talk at you because we have listeners and they want to know. This movie was really cool. It's about these psychologists who invent this like machine to go into dreams. It's very Inception-like.
Before Inception, this is very important. This is
they were
before Inception.
I was curious, so I looked it up, and it was like it came out long before Inception, but Nolan was like writing the script before this movie.
Right.
So they both kind of had the same idea at the same time, kind of. I don't mean to say that one stole from the other. The comparison is interesting though, because in Inception, like the dreams are all very realistic visually in a lot of ways. And in Paprika, because it's animated, it's able to kind of seamlessly move between a very realistic for anime depiction of like walking around Tokyo and eating in restaurants, and then kind of slip unobtrusively into this dream world where there's like a parade full of animals and dolls and giant frogs and things that are crazy that are from people's minds. So it was really cool. I liked Paprika and the character that she has of like sort of this like freer alter ego than her kind of like buttoned down self in the real world, and the way the plot like becomes this just symbolic mishmash instead of logic by the end. It was really cool. Yes, and a gorgeous movie.
Paprika is a great movie. It once again makes a case of why it's very sad for numerous reasons. On top of this, that Satoshi Kon is no longer with us.
Yeah, I definitely want to go watch more of his stuff, especially I hear Perfect Blue and Millennium Actress are really good.
I mean, Satoshi
Kon has that rare and unfortunate record of only doing hits, but that's because he died too young and he didn't have a chance to make a failure. And so like everything he's ever done was really good. His ads are really good. The storyboards we have from his uncompleted film that his producer friend is trying desperately to raise the money for, and says, he says, I will not die until I get this film made, are very good.
The animes he made, the mangas he made were very good, and he also has another manga that also got canceled halfway through, so never properly finished. His entire a lot of his work is just like this weird combination of like potential that comes through, but also like what could have been. And like he's very much at this point he kind of feels like the John F. Kennedy of anime makers. Is
he sort of like the Japanese Kubrick? Although Kubrick lived longer, obviously.
And Kubrick got to make way more movies.
Yeah.
Kubrick could have made more movies. Kubrick chose not to. Satoshi Kon made movies at a reasonable human pace. His body just gave up.
Well, especially by animation standards. So that obviously changes things too. It's a lot harder to get it made. But yes, like Paprika is amazing. It is one of my favorite animated films of all time, and definitely an example of how anime is not trash.
Well, I mean, it's a movie, so it's probably technically not an anime. So anime is still all trash. I think that's the big takeaway from today's Nothing But Trash, is that anime is all trash, and there's really no connection between Satoshi Kon's awesome like dream thriller and show about fucking your sister. So I think that's it for today's Nothing But Trash. David?
Well, as an addendum, though, since this is what I thought we were going to be talking about during it, but then Sam decided he had to talk about Eromanga Sensei to remind us that the world is terrible. Your Name is in theaters, and you can actually watch it like in America, and you should.
98% on Rotten Tomatoes, highest grossing anime of all time, better than anything Miyazaki's ever done. Watch it. Watch it now. You know, now.
I'm not quite willing to say it's better than everything Miyazaki's ever done, but at best, Miyazaki's done 2 films better than it. Maybe 3, considering one of them I haven't seen that's possibly better. But Makoto Shinkai is amazing director, and this is the first thing he's done in a while that's actually like full length and not like 40 minutes like Garden of Words was. But it is beautiful and very worth watching. And like Sam said, as of now, 98% Rotten Tomatoes. People love it. Watch the movie. It's great.
Yeah, I really need to go see that.
Yeah. And with that, thanks for listening to the podcast. Wait, what do I need to do order of?
That's it for this edition of the podcast.
Oh, okay. With that, that's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks for listening. We have to go now. The Kraken needs to apparently give us something. I think it may be some vinyls or something that may or may not be. I can't do. See, Josh, you took away the joke that would have worked here.
Look,
so
I have to go
say you have to go and pre-order the Persona 5 soundtrack vinyls. Oh my God, the Persona 5 soundtrack.
I can't, Sam. I don't have the money for that. Matt bought it. Bryant's being a bitch and only got the $100 one. We're making fun of him about it. I physically cannot afford to give that money.
No, I'm saying you
have they revealed the cover art to that yet? Because that's ridiculous.
No,
end the podcast by telling all the listeners to go buy the Persona 5 vinyl.
I'm absolutely not going to go do that. Give me a second. Okay.
You agree that that's ridiculous, though, right? That they.
No, it's just terrible. Like what they're doing is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Look. The price could be a pound of flesh, and I'd start cutting.
Okay. Let's see here.
Thank you for the tag, gentlemen.
Oh, I got it. We have to go now. 13 We have to go now. 13 Reasons Why is apparently inspired the Kraken just continuously sing Earth Angel over and over again, and it needs to stop.
It's a shame for the show that 13 Conversations About One Thing was already taken as a title.
And with that, I'm stopping.
Okay.